Our research methodology. The descriptive method in psychopathology. Research work, whatever the scientific field of predilection, presupposes a methodology by which the researcher or student researcher develops his theses and hypotheses in order to report his results. In the human sciences and social sciences, there are different schools of belonging. The choice of this or that school depends on the affinities between fellow researchers and/or academics. Or in the majority of cases, the choice of this or that research methodology depends on the master thinker at the origin of the school of thought to which one belongs. Thus, one researcher will be Freudian, another will be Kleinian, etc., while others will claim to belong to the famous schools of ancient scholars. Aristotelians are distinguished from Platonists, for example. In this synthesis of our methodology, the objective is not to highlight a particular school of thought. On the other hand, our aim is to promote complementarity between the different approaches of the human sciences. Psychology cannot do without the discoveries of medicine, and especially of psychiatry in particular. Psychopathology cannot ignore the major contributions of psychoanalysis. The social sciences depend on the human sciences, and vice versa. This interdependence also exists in all areas of research in the so-called exact sciences. A preliminary observation is necessary. Why have we chosen to favor the descriptive method in psychopathology? I would like to point out that, in my approach as an apprentice researcher, the method was not a starting point, but rather a result. Indeed, when writing my doctoral thesis, which was my first academic publication, I did not start by developing a scientific research method. Of course, I established a research plan to organize my work. But this plan was regularly modified to adapt it to the organization of my theoretical and clinical reflection, this in accordance with my theses and research hypotheses. Thus, it was only after defending my doctoral thesis that I tried to highlight the common thread that links the different parts of my work. More particularly, I was helped by the constructive criticism of independent observers. The different opinions of readers allowed me to discover various theoretical foundations that my reflection refers to, and/or complements it, from other authors. It is these same theoretical and clinical foundations that I have grouped together, a posteriori, under the name of descriptive method. The field of our observations. Research in psychopathology requires a ground, a field of experimentation. These are clinical cases which allow us to develop theoretical and clinical reflection based on the different scientific theories relating to our specific field. From my doctoral thesis until the time I am writing this summary text on my methodology, 2016, it is the case of Rwanda that has served as my field of observation. Indeed, it is the problem of collective violence that will have constituted the starting point of my research in clinical psychology in general, and in fundamental psychopathology in particular. Of course, when we speak of the case of Rwanda, it is not about Rwanda as a frozen territory from a spatio-temporal point of view. It is rather about Rwanda as a people, as a nation, as a country with a history and a cultural identity. Because according to my different research hypotheses, these are issues relating to history and cultural identity. It is rather about Rwanda as a people, as a nation, as a country with a history and a cultural identity, because according to my different research hypotheses, these are issues relating to history and cultural identity. It is rather about Rwanda as a people, as a nation, as a country with a history and a cultural identity, because, according to my different research hypotheses, these are issues relating to history and cultural identity. These are issues relating to history and cultural identity. These are issues relating to history and cultural identity, mutatis mutandis, which will have led to the consequence of recurring collective violence in the land of 1,000 hills. Obviously, Rwanda not being a country closed in on itself, I also wonder about the role of neighboring countries and the influence of the colonial period and neocolonialism in the occurrence of genocidal massacres in Rwanda and in the sub-region. From this point of view, Rwanda constitutes what we could call a textbook case. Through collective violence, It is not only the question of collective psychology, psychology of groups or masses, which is posed, but also that of the subject. What is the nature of the influence that the group exerts on the individual subject, so that the latter becomes a veritable machine for killing, pillaging, raping, to destroy public and/or other people's property? There is a hypothesis, or even a thesis, that has served as an alibi for some researchers and observers on the situation in Rwanda. The recurring collective conflict in Rwanda would be linked to the ethnic problem between Hutu on one side and Tutsi on the other. Personally, I was not satisfied with this simplistic presentation of a much more complex reality, because one is not born Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa, one becomes one. It is the group, starting with the family, that assigns to each individual of its members an ethnic belonging by means of different sociocultural attributes, the name, the initiation rites, the distinctive insignia of the group, etc. Now, we have historical examples that demonstrate that the individual can get rid of the ethnic attributes of his distant ancestors to belong to a new ethnic community, this without having lost the genetic heritage of the past. This is the case of certain exiles who definitively abandon the archaic identifying ethnic attributes, by distance in space and time, voluntarily or involuntarily. Let us cite some incontestable examples. African Americans, West Indians, descendants of Asian migrations to the countries of Europe or America, descendants of Europeans who colonized distant countries in Africa, in Latin America or Asia. All these human groups have lost the identifying ethnic attributes of their original cultures, to belong either to other pre-existing cultures or to other new ethnic groups created by themselves. More particularly, in Rwanda, the distinctive ethnic signs, the territory, the language, the initiation rites, had already disappeared even before the colonial era. There is no ethnic village in Rwanda. There is no language belonging to each of the pseudo-ethnic groups in Rwanda. The initiation rites were the same for all Rwandans, even before the colonial era. For all these reasons, through my doctoral thesis and in my research work complementary to this thesis, I demonstrate that ethnic belonging does not constitute, in Rwanda as elsewhere, a hereditary heritage from which the subject cannot overcome certain defects, a hereditary heritage from which the individual cannot rid himself of ideology when it becomes murderous. Because, in Rwanda, as in some other countries in the world, ethnic ideology has become an instrument of domination and conquest of power. This is why the occurrence of collective violence can only be analyzed from different scientific approaches in order to account for the complexity of the phenomenon. Hence the need for a descriptive method which is based on phenomenology, with regard to our specific approach, as a descriptive science of essences. As E. Husserl has very well indicated, phenomenology is a philosophical method which seeks to return to the things themselves and to describe them as they appear to consciousness, independently of any constituted knowledge. By analogy, by means of the descriptive method, our approach consists of describing the individual and/or group symptom as it appears, from a historical point of view, independently of any established knowledge. Let's be clear. Even if ethnic belonging does not constitute a hereditary identity heritage, the fact remains that the construction of the subject is essentially based on the group's identification markers. For this, the link between the group and the individual is unbreakable. As soon as the individual separates himself from the custom of his origins, he must necessarily find other social frameworks of memory, according to Mr. Halbwachs, to support its becoming subject. In other words, the innate biological heritage and the acquired sociocultural heritage complement each other, and one cannot fully express itself without relying on the other. It is therefore in this between play, where the I is permanently split between the innate and the acquired, that psychic life is born. It would thus be difficult, or even impossible, to rigorously distinguish the part of each of these two determinisms of the soul in the accomplishment of our acts. Consequently, psychopathology is situated in this between play, and the descriptive method allows us to present in a neutral approach the essences of the I, taken sometimes in the archaic desires of the subject in the making, sometimes in the current socio-cultural constraints and avatars. Copy Sebunuma D. Descriptive Psychopathology 2. Essays on Sociocidal Genocides. Éditions Umusozo, Issy-les-Moulineaux, 2016. Kagame A. The Socio-Family Organizations of Former Rwanda. Memoirs Innate. Volume XXV8. Brussels, published by the Belgian Royal Colonial Institute, 1954. Hachette Encyclopedic Dictionary. Paris, 1998. Pages 923.